Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we are going to be jumping into reduce scores and chord notation for 4 parts. So this is going to largely just be a lot of things you need to know about type stuff. So a reduced score. So if you don't know what a score is just basically it's what the conductor has. It has all the parts on one big sheet of paper, right? Because if we handed all the parts to every person, that's a lot of notes on one page, and the pages are generally very large. It's just not very nice versus handing, here's your part, and then you just play that part. So a score is just a document, as I wrote here, with all the parts on it. Now, there are different ways to display these parts, and there's actually different kinds of scores. A score might be a reduction. And so that's our next one. We have a reduced score. And that's what we're going to be using of reduced scores. There's different kinds. So, right, we could take a score with a bunch of clarinet parts, maybe sum it down to just like one staff with the basis of our clarinet part. And then if we had like some saxophones, we could do the same for the saxophones. So there's different ways we could reduce things. We're going to be talking about the piano reduction. So that's the one we're going to be mostly using. It is the version of the reduced score where you make it into a piano part. And so scores are a little much for us at this point just because they talk about orchestration and all these other things. But a piano reduction takes a piece, whether it's written for piano or not, and creates a piano score out of it, which is what you've been working with, the grand staff. Now, you might be going a piano piece. How could you create a piano score out of that? What does that mean? That means you're taking whatever, maybe it has a complex harmonic structure, and you're reducing it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a whole bunch of different parts. So we say, okay, reductions range in complexity depending on their purpose. So depending on what you're doing, your reduction will be different. Some can do very little reducing and basically be just a piano version of the piece. And others will reduce it all the way down to like the bare bones of the harmonic and rhythm, harmonic structure and rhythmic structure that's in the piece. The reason I bring this up is because we will be writing in parts, okay? So we're introducing parts now. And because of this, we are working with piano reductions. It is common to create a piano reduction part of a large work as a prototype. So, you might have wondered, how do the composers way back in the day make these large scale works? Well, the answer was a lot of them used piano reductions. They would write a piano version first, and then they'd blow it up to orchestral proportions, right? And it's far easier to fix a note on a piano part, and you can also hear what it sounds like, because if you don't have a computer, because you were born, several hundred years ago, you could just play it on the piano and you could hear it. So we like piano reductions. Although we are composing on the grand staff and generally working with piano, we must remember we are writing parts. So as I was writing this, I started realizing like all these things that we just sort of take for granted when we look at music. One of those is the difference between parts and if you didn't know, if you've never heard of parts before, you wouldn't even know this thing was there. But what it is on the piano, we're going to be putting 4 parts. We're going to be writing for SATB, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, for choir most of the time. And we're going to be treating these 4 parts accordingly. And as such, each part needs to be represented as a part. You don't want to mix parts up. You don't want to treat the parts like they're somehow the same. They're different parts. And then to define parts here, we have parts are just individual lines. And as such, each has its own unique job. The clarinet and flute, here's my example, right? So clarinet and flute might have the same line of music. They might look like they have the same part, but their parts are very different. A flute is concert pitch. So if you tell a flute to play B flat and then you tell a clarinet to play B flat, they're going to be 2 totally different B flats. You have to tell the clarinet to transpose their B flat. And so there's this whole thing where you have concert pitch where the director could say play B flat, and everyone knows play transpose. They say play the correct note, because if you told a flute to play B flat and a clarinet to play B flat, he's going to be a half step, or she is going to be a half step low, and you're going to get this awful sound. It's going to sound terrible because they're not playing the same note. And so if you mix the parts up, that would be a grievous mistake. So there are major differences later on, but just to sort of illustrate that parts, even though they might look the same, it is important that we treat them as a separate part. They are a separate function of our music. We say the role of parts and the amount of harmonic independence So you might be saying, whoa, this has got some big words in it. Harmonic independence, just meaning how individually, like the role it plays harmonically in your song. So the role of parts in the harmonic independence is a subject of counterpoint, and will be taught in later courses. Counterpoint's actually in a 4-year, I believe it's the 2nd year of study. So yeah, counterpoint. But for now, we're just concerned with notating parts correctly. Our notation must be clear as to what note goes to what part. If it's unclear, then we've confused the parts, and that also generally indicates a confusion of the music. You're not quite sure what's going on at that moment in time. So we want to be very clear, and there's a lot of really, really common notation errors that occur when we're writing music by hand. MuseScore is in many ways an excellent tool, but it's also a big crutch, because when you're in school and someone says, the instructor calls you up to go write on the board and, I don't know, complete the 4-part harmony or whatever, you're worried about writing in front of the class, but if you've never handwritten music, this is going to be a problem. So I encourage handwriting music. When I'm taking notes in class, I write by hand. That's what I do. We will be using SATB. So here's this SATB thing, and we say, which stands for soprano, alto, tenor, voice. These represent vocal ranges. So when we have a singer and a singer says they're a soprano, there's more. There's more. They're baritones. But for now, this is the one everyone uses. This one. This is the basic choir setup, and will be the structure for many harmony exercises. This is not going away anytime soon. This is pretty much here to stay. While writing each part normally, while each part normally gets its own staff. So if we had like a saxophone, or if you had the choir, you're gonna hand the soprano part, and you're gonna hand the tenor part, or whatever. We write in piano reduction. So we don't typically, when we're going to write in a piano reduction. Why? Well, it saves a lot of paper, and that's really useful for us. But it's also all compressed. We can see the relationships. It's more compact. We can see how everything fits together in just 2 staffs, and that's really nice. So we don't want to look at across 4 staves. That's like, what the heck? But you will get good at that as you write more complex scores. But for when we're learning harmony, let's keep things, simple and efficient. So the order of SATB also follows the ranges each part uses. So soprano is first, and it's the highest. And therefore, so here we go. So therefore, soprano is always the top line on the treble clef. So you see how we have 4 parts, and they're pretty distinct here. We can see them easily because the stems give us a great indication as to what note goes to what part. So we say, well, all these top ones that have the stem going up, these are part of the soprano line, okay? And then the next lower line is the next lower vocal range. And so that'd be the alto, and that gets the bottom part of the treble clef. And then we go down to the bass clef, and we say the top part right here, this is our tenor. And then the lowest voice is the bass, of course. It makes sense. So that's our order: soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Okay. So here, this one is a little less clear because we're using whole notes. Stems on notes are a great indication as to what is going on here. This with whole notes, it's a lot harder to tell, right? Especially if parts cross, which will be a topic we'll talk about later. But anyway, same deal here: soprano, alto, tenor, bass. So they follow the vocal ranges. So we say to distinguish our parts, we always stem them in the same direction. So you notice how our parts are stemming the same way. So for example, if our soprano part crossed our alto part, it would look like this. The stem is still going up. That way you know that this note belongs to the part that is the sopranos. It does not belong to the tenor. The tenor is to sing this note. So the stems indicate this. And generally, this is a big no-no. We do not cross our soprano because the soprano outlines the melody. And so it's as a rule. We'll talk about crossing parts later. So anyways, yeah, I'm not sure what note that was. It was a C. Okay, cool. So anyways, that's how you know what note goes to what part. And it's really important because later on, you're going to see weird scenarios. And in older music, this wasn't necessarily always the standard. And so you'll just come across music that was written in weird ways. But a lot of times they are observing these rules because these rules are pretty old. So, okay. There's a little bit about that. You'll get this in the theory workbook as well, if you're wondering. So which is in the description. So here it is. This whole STEM business is an ordeal for new composers and is made even worse by the fact that we are using computers as a crutch. Here are some common mistakes in ideal notation. So let's look at some, good examples, bad examples. And when you get up to right at the board, you're suddenly going to realize, because things that you don't realize here is right now, everything is all nice and symmetrical, right? It's easy to see problems. But when you're writing by hand, your notes get squished. I've seen people write seconds in a really weird, not formal way. I've even seen instructors do it. I've done not a ton of engraving, but I've done engraving for a couple different instructors. And sometimes they scrunch a bunch of notes in a way that you would never see on music that was printed formally. So it's my job as the engraver to, make it look like that. But it's always sort of what the heck is this? You want to get good at handwriting music so that a musician could interpret it. And so, okay. So here we have the case where we have our 4 voices, but they're stemmed the same way. So for 4 parts, this is wrong because, this is a separate part. This is not part of the same part. When you do this, that means that part, so if this was the soprano line, there would be a harmony in the soprano line. The sopranos, if you had 5 sopranos, maybe 3 of them would sing the more important note, whatever that is, and then the melody note or whatever, and then 2 more would sing the harmony part. You've split the soprano part. So there's no alto part here is essentially what's going on. Now, this is fine for piano. This is the way we do things for piano, but this is not how we do things for soprano, alto, tenor, bass. These should be separate. So this should really be like that, right? So, okay. Moving on. Now, here's the ideal. See, ideal. Bang. Our 4 parts are clearly separated. Easy to see. So we like that. All right. This is a big no-no. Okay, so here we have we have a part that crosses, right? Not cool. Because we identify parts, I should put an S there, parts by stem direction. This means here our parts are crossed. While it is not forbidden, it is usually wrong. And for the most part, while you're new, it's pretty much forbidden. But you'll see later on I think we'll talk about it in this lesson. There are scenarios where it's okay, but it was hard for me to even, I found some examples, but I don't show them to you because right now we are just not going to do that. Okay, we're not going to cross parts right now. But anyways, this one's an exceptionally no, because if this was our melody, we've confused the melody, which now your whole piece, what the heck's happening now? So this is ideal. See, parts do not cross. Also, take note here that actually this is demonstrated incorrectly down here. I had a hard time getting MuseScore to even let me make this mistake because the grand staff meets at middle C. So we know that the treble clef and the bass clef, right? They share middle C. They're both 1 ledger line below and 1 ledger line above. So when writing music, a common mistake is to join parts across the grand staff. That's not okay. That is very confusing. We just don't do that. We do not join across the staff for unison. It confuses the parts. Now, in MuseScore, for you to make that mistake, you're going to have to kind of work at it. But when you're writing, it actually is very common. So be careful. We say, okay. And that's what I wanted to point out up here. This would be the correct way to do it. So they're both playing the same C as they were over here, except for now they have been separated to their respective clefs. And so the parts are unconfused, very easy to see. Because over here, it's just like what the heck's going on over there? So we say, okay. Okay, so here we look at these 4 notes, and then over here we have 3 notes. And you might be going, it looks as though a voice disappeared. There's one of the voices just poof, went away. It's got a rest. I hid the rest here. That's not supposed to be there. It's invisible right now. So it says, this is another less common mistake in Muse Score, because Muse Score has, when you're writing, it automatically does, rest and stuff for you. Generally, correctly, it does a lot of things wrong still, but, but it's all over handwritten music. Another common one. Here, the tenor is combined with the alto. So you see this note? This is the same as this. So this basically went up to here. This is another big no. So typically, this should go up to a D and stay down there, but instead it goes up here. No, don't do that. And don't have things jumping across the staff. Now, I know it seems ridiculous right now, and in Muse Score, it is kind of like, you just naturally don't do that. But for piano players, and especially when you get quick and you're writing harmonies, it's easy to forget sometimes. And so if you're writing by hand, you'll make this mistake. So be careful. Just watch out for that stuff. We don't want to confuse our parts. So we say, another mistake I see written on the board all the time, but Muse Score takes care of for us again. Stems should form a nice line showing the notes are on the same beat. And I remember a girl made this mistake on the board. This is when I learned about it. And the instructor made an example out of her, not in like a mean way, but he did point it out. And I was like, dang. And she wrote like this, right? She wasn't used to the way seconds appear. And because I'm always writing piano stuff, I knew it, because she was writing a cluster chord. And it's kind of confusing where the accidentals go when you're writing by hand. So, and it was clear she kind of relied on Muse Score to do some of this for her. So she wrote it like this, which the problem with this is it confuses where the beat goes. So sure, they're both a half note, but it looks like they start on different beats. It's not clear. There are exceptions. If you had a dot here, then you'll probably see them done like this to give emphasis to the fact that there's a dot there, so the musician doesn't read it wrong. But here, since they're the same length, it's confusing. And so this is the proper way. We want them to form a line. This allows the musician, when reading, to see exactly where the beat is. And it makes the measure just more pleasant to look at. So this is how we would write a second, not like this. And yes, another note, I didn't really follow it all the time because it's a huge pain to fix everything. But if a part, it has a rest, there should be a respective rest in that part, ideally on the same line where the part's at. So for example, if we have a rest here, there should be a half rest accounting for the missing bass part. This can be problematic if you have a lot of stuff going on in your clef, or not your clef, in your staff. So sometimes you'll see notes sort of shoved into weird spots, but at least where they're seeable. But generally you want to keep them in place. You just use common sense. Just make it, if you're a musician reading this music, where would it make the most sense to put this? And we're talking about professional musicians, not high school musicians, because high school musicians would do a lot of wrong stuff. So, okay, that's what we have. And now you're saying these are the most common mistakes. So these are all things you kind of need to watch out for. These are just tiny mistakes. If someone comments this on your piece, it's a petty remark, but it is a remark that, if you're ever going to work professionally, you need to know about these things and not do these. And also, be able to fix them when you see someone else having done these. So you say, okay, these are the most common, and there are definitely more. There are more where these came from, but these are the ones that have serious issues or will make you look silly. So you don't want to do any of these. Be aware of them. At some point, you will probably be plagued by one without realizing it. Everyone makes the mistake. At some point, you'll accidentally do something funny, and you'll look silly, but you just fix it. No one really cares that much if you do it consistently, or maybe it's a serious flaw. Another common one is how people write their rhythms. I see that even more than I see this, because people can know how to write these correctly, or at least most of the time correctly. But rhythms, we'll talk about rhythms as they come up. All right, so that is stemming. I have a separate one for voicing and stuff. But that's the reduced score, and that's how we stem our parts. So now hopefully you have an idea of a part, at least a little more clearly. I know it seems a little straightforward, but you got to keep in mind when we're writing, these things dictate a lot of the conventions that we're going to use. So you have to be really aware of parts, how they work, the stems, the directions. It really sucks if you make a mistake like this on an entrance exam or something, because if you get dinged over this and you get placed in a lower class just because you had these all over the place, that really sucks. And hopefully you get a college that legitimately has an instructor look at it instead of just sort of passing it through a machine. That way they know, oh, you do know your harmony. You just made a lot of silly mistakes. I don't see how a machine would really catch these. But some instructors are like crazy. They're like, if you don't know this stuff, you can't be in my class. You got to redo this. Clearly your fundamentals lack. They sort of extrapolate from your mistakes. So we just want to minimize them. And I personally wouldn't want to take that instructor anyways. But I know they exist. Rate my professor. It's a good friend. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.